Now, this 2025 witness statement, it takes up about a page and a half, and I am going to read it in full and comment because I find it very interesting. This came from last year. It's brand spanking new. This isn't 1947 where technology was more limited. Documents are more or less falling apart, hard to read. They've been photocopied and scanned and microfiched and blown up, and they look kind of rustic. No, this was typed out very clearly on a modern-day computer, easy to read, with new technology at our fingertips. So I find that very important to note. This isn't old history here. This is very recent, very ongoing. And it reads as follows. In late 2025, during early evening hours, I, a senior U.S. intelligence officer, along with a colleague and two pilots, departed our Joint Operations Center, JOC, in a helicopter. Now, I'll pause occasionally as I read this just to make a few comments, and I find it very interesting that there's no location given with this. None. Not there in the introduction. No further information on this Joint Operations Center. All we know is that it's late 2025. Our mission was to investigate loud thuds heard in the mountains on the test range, which coincided with unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, sightings reported over the previous several nights. We aimed to search remote mountain areas for possible debris or objects that might explain the orb-like sightings. After leaving the JOC, again, that's the Joint Operations Center, and we don't know where that is, we flew a low-altitude map of the Earth route through the mountain range for several hours. Multiple times we spotted debris on the ground and descended for closer inspection. Each time we determined it was remnants from rockets and other projectiles that had crashed during years of weapons testing on the range. Again, location not clear. As we continued searching over areas of reported orb activity, we discovered a large cave entrance with no visible end in sight. Pause. I had brought up in my call with Susan Mel's Hole, the famous bottomless pit that was reported to Art Bell circa 1997, as I recall, and it was believed to be out in Washington state, though it was never found. And despite Mel's best efforts, he could not find the end of this particular hole. Sounds similar in a way to what's described here. I'm just throwing that out there. Now, when I was in eastern Tennessee, I had an opportunity to go inside of a cave, and it's known that that cave is at least 27 miles deep. Can you imagine that? Just pause for a second. A 27-mile long and deep cave. And at the deepest, I was 330 feet from Earth's surface. This cave entrance was small. They were able to put 2 regular-sized doors over the entrance to the cave. That's it. So to hear about a large cave entrance with no end in sight, that's interesting to me. All right, going back to the little report here, the terrain around the entrance offered no safe landing spot. Again, I believe that it's that big. So I instructed the pilot to orbit it several times for observation. We noted the location and pressed on. Running low on fuel, we headed to a prearranged rendezvous point to meet a ground team and let my colleague disembark. The 2 pilots and I then proceeded to a pre-positioned tanker on the range for refueling. Our plan was to return to base afterward, but the JOC, again that's the Joint Operations Center, radioed with a request to search a nearby mountain for debris spotted by one of the ground teams. By this time, the sun had set, and the pilot switched to forward-looking infrared and night vision goggles while I continued to use the unaided naked eye. So now you have 3 different ways of looking at this, so that's important to know. After a brief search of the mountain yielded no findings, the pilots began navigating back to the JOC to end the mission. I then received a message from the JOC. Now, this is where the report takes a totally different turn. Radar had detected hits several miles uprange from our position, the same area where UAP activity had been observed on prior nights. Why were they out there making a big deal of this in the daytime when these reports happened at night? Obviously, they wanted to see a little bit more, and you can do that when you don't have total darkness. Duh, I get it. But they should have also, instead of embarking out on this journey in the daytime, they should have done a daytime trip. They should have done a nighttime trip. But that's just me being critical. Going back to the report, the senior U.S. intelligence officer says that they relayed this to pilots and altered course to intercept whatever this activity was. What followed was a series of close UAP encounters lasting over an hour. Why is it that many of these, if they're not just a few seconds, they last about an hour? That's always consistent, it seems, from the reports that I've read, from the stories that I've heard. It's either a few seconds or it goes on for about an hour. En route, ground teams reported spotting a UAP or FLIR. Again, that is the UAP or FLIR. Okay, my mistake. I was reading something else. Describing it as super hot, low to the ground, and moving east, then south at a high speed. The object then split into two and changed direction. Upon arrival, we scanned the area using NVG, FLIR, and the naked eye. So the night vision goggles, the forward-looking infrared, and the regular naked eye, to see the object as it moved. The ground team suddenly radioed that the object had risen from the ground, approached within 10 feet of the helicopter, dropped below us, and then sped away. The pilots observed it through NVGs and saw it split into two as a smaller object emerged before it accelerated out of sight. We briefly pursued but broke off, unable to match its speed. At one point, the JOC informed us that several fighter jets had launched on a training mission in our operating area and requested their assistance in identifying the UAP. Minutes later, the JOC directed us to nearby radar detections. We took up a hovering position at about 700 feet above ground level. At a distance, we saw countless orange orbs swarming in all directions against the backdrop of the mountain. The display lasted several minutes before fading. The JOC then redirected us to our previous position based on fresh radar hits. I provided coordinates to the pilots, and we moved to intercept, hovering again at 700 feet above ground level. Through night vision goggles, the pilots and I, using the naked eye, observed two large orbs flare up side by side close to the helicopter, stationary and just above the rotor disc to our right. They were oval-shaped, orange with a white or yellow center, and emitted light in all directions. After a few seconds, a third orb flared up below the pair, followed by a fourth below that, forming a total of 4 or 5 in a T formation under the original two. Moments later, they dimmed in reverse order, remaining stationary until they vanished from view. The entire event lasted 10 to 15 seconds. I didn't take photos, as I was focused on assessing what it was and whether it posed a threat. Now, that is a disappointment. No pictures. Because we're living in a modern era where we have great technology and supposedly you're up close. Now, I understand the perception that it was a threat, but it is too bad that there was no running camera of some kind, if I'm being critical here, because that could be an opportunity to get some kind of close-up footage. Everything's always from a distance. That little red dot that I was referring to earlier in my conversation with Joe, what was that? How far away was that? It was very far. They had to send it to a lab to get blown up, and it was very pixelated, very grainy. Now here they're very close. No pictures. That's too bad. After this encounter, the pilots briefly considered landing due to the object's proximity, but opted to remain hovering at 700 feet above ground level for further observation. We then spotted the fighter jets entering visual range at about 23,000 feet above ground level, identifiable by their blinking navigation lights. As we watched from afar, the same type of orbs appeared directly above the fighters. They flared up one at a time in a horizontal formation, matching the jet's speed and flight path. After 10 to 15 seconds, they dimmed sequentially and disappeared. This repeated several times as the jets transited the airspace, and eventually landed. I remarked to the pilots what seemed the orbs that we encountered were now chasing the fighters. We also observed orange orbs flaring up and down around us for several minutes, forming a distinct triangle before vanishing. Low on fuel, another disappointment here that they were low on fuel, the pilots decided to return to the JOC, the Joint Operations Center, which, by the way, location not clear. After landing, I briefly spoke with them, mostly to express thanks. And it wraps up like this. We were virtually speechless after these observations. I then entered the JOC for a quick debrief before driving home. You just go home after that? Like it was nothing? Oh, goodness. Well, I don't quite know what to make of it other than that is a very convincing modern-day story. And it came out in the tranche of documents released on Friday as the Pentagon releases more UFO files. But still, no definitive answer, no definitive analysis, plenty of unknowns, plenty of questions. You do with that what you will. We'll continue and wrap up in a moment on WTIC News Talk 1080.